Due to the nature of the crimes and disturbing photos shared in this true crime collector video,
it seems to me that you're suggesting that had the police done their job, had they followed the leads, had they really been on your case prior to April 2nd, 1988, they would have caught you, and some of this suffering could have been prevented.
Maybe not caught me. Scared me off, maybe. Prevented things from happening after how? Definitely.
In a way, do you wish they had?
Yes.
viewer discretion is highly advised. Kidnapping and captivity, abuse and assault, physical and erotic torture, all atrocities committed by one sadistic freak who is now known as the Kansas City Butcher. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born on January 31, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, to Robert Andrew Berdella Sr. and Mary Louise Berdella. 7 years later, the couple bore a second son, Daniel. The family regularly attended Sunday Mass, as their Italian father was a devout Catholic. The Berdella boys also attended religion classes, and Robert Jr. was deemed an intelligent child, though he struggled socially with the other children. Perhaps it was due to his speech impairment and thick glasses, which often left him to be the brunt of jokes and bullying. Robert Sr. was known to abuse his sons, both emotionally and physically, subjecting them to countless beatings, usually with a leather strap. Robert Sr. regularly showed favoritism towards younger brother Daniel, as he more closely fit his ideal of what a son should be, popular and athletic. It was during Robert's adolescent years he came to the realization that he was homosexual. However, knowing how his immediate family would react and being fearful of his father's rage, he kept his sexuality a secret. It wasn't until he was in his later teens that his secret began to have a violent emotional impact on him. He would have irrational bouts of aggression and was particularly harsh and scornful towards females. Though his behavior was odd, he graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School in 1967 with exceptional grades. He moved on to Kansas City Art Institute, where he wanted to pursue his dream of becoming a professor. However, during his second year of college, he fell prey to a group of students who engaged in using and selling drugs. It was around this time he added alcohol to his regular diet. He also took his eccentric behavior to an extreme by decapitating ducks and experimenting with drugs on dogs shamelessly in front of others. His newfound drug career was cut short when he was arrested at age 19 for selling methamphetamines to an undercover cop. He pleaded guilty, but was only put on a 5-year probation due to it being a first offense. A short month after his arrest and release, he was arrested again for possession of marijuana and LSD. This time, he spent 5 days in jail, but was released due to insufficient evidence for a conviction. By 1969, Robert decided to leave the Kansas City Art Institute after becoming angry with his professors and administrators for reprimanding his outlandish decisions and behaviors. At this point, he was openly gay, but decided to use this sense of freedom with male prostitutes, drug addicts, criminals, and runaways. By engaging with individuals who were down on their luck, Robert would have full control of the relationship. It would be easy to engage in sexual relations with these men, as he would give them money or a place to stay. It gave him a false sense of purpose and power. Robert's sexual fantasies took an evil turn when he encountered a movie called The Collector. The premise of the film involved a neurotic man who stalked and abducted a young, attractive woman. He held the woman in his basement for his own selfish entertainment. Eventually, the woman falls ill, and he believes he can nurse her back to health, and the pair could begin a life together. However, the abducted woman would be overcome by her illness and pass away in his basement. He believes the woman got what she deserved and vowed to pick a woman who would be better suited at fulfilling his fantasies. This idea of a chase, seize, and capture made Robert's mind run wild. He found the objective enticing and thus began his pursuit of erratic sexual fulfillment. Robert found his first victim at the Westport Flea Market, where he became a merchant selling art, jewelry, and antiques. Robert's overtly gay persona led 19-year-old Jerry Howell, son of another merchant at the market, to confide in Robert about his own homosexual adventures as a prostitute. not knowing the sick fantasies that were brewing inside of Robert. This disclosure was the start of a vicious killing spree. On July 5, 1984, Jerry asked Robert to take and accompany him to a dancing contest in the city of Merriam, Kansas. However, Robert had other plans. He gave Jerry a diazepam ace-promazine cocktail in his car and continued to do so in his home until he finally lost consciousness. He then proceeded to inject the 19-year-old with tranquilizers as he bound him to his bed. For 28 hours, a sadistic Robert repeatedly taunted, tortured, raped, and sodomized him with foreign objects. While Jerry came in and out of consciousness, he begged to be let go and asked why, over and over again. Robert explains in later testimony that Jerry possibly asphyxiated on his own vomit, or the gag and medicines made it too difficult for him to breathe properly. Once Robert realized Jerry's body went limp, he attempted CPR to no avail. He then dragged Jimmy's body to his basement and began making incisions in his arms and jugular vein to drain the blood from his body, so he could cut up his body without blood splattering about. Once his body was completely drained of his blood, he used a chainsaw to dissect the body and wrap the pieces in newspaper and trash bags. He put the dismembered youth on his curbside on trash day, and the pieces were unknowingly whisked away to the landfill. Less than a year later, on April 10, 1985, a 20-year-old man named Robert Sheldon asked Robert for a place to crash for a few days. Though he wasn't attracted to Sheldon, he agreed to let him stay. However, just 2 days later, on April 12th, Robert eerily measured young Sheldon, as someone he could express some of the anger and frustration that I had toward other people on. He drugged Sheldon in a similar manner to that of Jerry, and held him captive in a spare bedroom for 3 days. This time, he added to his torturing tactics by pouring drain cleaner in his eyes, inserting needles underneath his fingertips, binding and cutting his wrists with piano wires, and filling his ears with caulk. It wasn't until April 15th, when a maintenance man arrived at the home, that Robert felt he had no choice but to suffocate Sheldon. He did so with a sack over his head, so he would not be heard. As with his previous victim, he drained his blood and dissected him, this time in the bathroom. Just 2 months later, in June, Robert was now on a roll and found another opportunity to live out his perverse fantasy yet again. Mark Wallace, a 20-year-old who assisted with Robert's yard work, got caught in a severe thunderstorm while on the property and sought asylum in the tool shed. Robert went to his aid and told him he could stay in the house until the storm passed. Little did Mark know, he'd be safer with the storm than he would be with Robert. Once in the home, he voluntarily took chlorpromazine to help calm his nerves, giving Robert the opportunity to begin his torture sequence. Mark was taken to the bathroom where he was held captive and was tortured with alligator clips on his nipples, so Robert could administer electric shocks to his body. Robert also experimented with hypodermic needles, piercing him with various drugs along the muscles in his back. Robert decided to record the reason and time of death that would be revealed in later interviews. The drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen killed him. His time of death is 7 p.m. on June 23rd. Now on a roll, Robert decided he would up the ante with his next victim, who he found on September 26, 1985. In later testimony, Robert would indicate his first 3 victims were just practice and didn't count as real victims. The one he called his first real victim was 25-year-old James Ferris, with whom he took his sexual torture to new heights. He met with James at a bar and brought him home, where he started his routine with drugs and tranquilizers, this time hid inconspicuously in a meal. He tied James to his bed, where he connected the alligator clips to his shoulders and testicles, and sent 7,700-volt electrical shocks into his body. He also used the hypodermic needles again in an acupuncture-like manner, this time on his neck and genitals. Robert noted in his records that after 27 hours, James was no longer able to sit up, experienced very delayed breathing, and promptly died. After a 9-month break, Robert runs into Todd Stoops, a 23-year-old drug addict and prostitute at Kansas City's Liberty Memorial Park. He lured Todd to his home with the promise of drugs on June 17, 1986. He found Todd tremendously attractive, and though he was excited to torture him, he wanted to keep him around longer than his previous victims. Robert would later tell investigators that he did not do this for his enjoyment, but for his mental and physical satisfaction. He tried to torture Todd in a way that would guarantee he wouldn't die. He used his handy alligator clips on his eyes in an attempt to blind him, and poured drain cleaner down his throat to suppress his screams. On June 27th, Robert became irate when Todd asked him for something to eat and drink. He responded to the request by rupturing his anal wall with his fist, causing severe bleeding and dispelling of fluids. It wasn't until July 1st that Todd would finally pass due to his ruptured anal wall, which had caused septic shock. His next known victim came in the spring of 1987. Robert claimed he didn't plan on 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson being one of his torture targets at first. However, on June 23rd, after Larry joked about robbing local gay men, he immediately decided otherwise. Larry was kept in his basement, where he suffered electrical shocks and broken bones from beatings with an iron rod. He was moved from the dank basement to one of the bedrooms, where he continued to be cooperative with his physical and sexual abuse. Robert advised him he would not instill as much pain as long as he kept being compliant. 6 weeks into captivity, tired of living this way, Larry decided a risky move, and during one of their sexual encounters, he intensely bit into Robert's penis.
When I went to the hospital in August of '87 with a human bite to my penis, I tried to turn in a complaint to the police department for the specific reason of developing an alibi.
Before going to the hospital for his well-deserved injury, Robert bludgeoned Larry with a tree limb and suffocated him with a bag and some rope. Upon his return to the home, he returned his body to the basement where he was cut into pieces. His head was kept in a plastic bag in Robert's freezer until he later decided to foolishly bury it in his own backyard. 8 months later, Robert would become acquainted with his final victim, 22-year-old prostitute Christopher Bryson. He picked up Christopher at 1 a.m. on March 29, 1988, and brought him to his home for a cash and sex exchange. He took the same iron bar he used to break the previous victim's bones and rendered Christopher unconscious before binding him to his bed. He instilled his regular torture antics, but this time, he used ammonia instead of drain cleaner. He liked Christopher and told him he would be willing to negotiate the physical torture, but the sexual abuse was not up for debate. Unfortunately, for Robert, his fondness of Christopher would lead to his downfall and capture. Somehow, Christopher convinced Robert to tie his hands in front of him, as opposed to above his head and attached to the bedpost. He also managed to get a television put in the room to entertain him while Robert was off at work. On the 4th day of his capture, Robert unintentionally left a pack of matches on the nightstand within Christopher's reach. He used the matches to burn through his restraints and escape from the home by jumping out of the window, breaking his foot upon landing. Completely nude, minus a dog collar, and now with the pain of a broken foot, he began running toward the street and found a meter maid, who called the police. When questioned by police officers, Christopher did not want to incriminate himself as a male prostitute. He instead reported that he was hitchhiking when Robert picked him up, held him captive, sodomized, drugged, beat, and forced him to ingest ammonia. Due to his red, swollen eyes, deep scars, and welts across his body, he was transported to Menorah Medical Center to receive treatment. A few police officers stayed to survey the home, while another went to the Kansas City Police Department to request a search warrant for Robert's home. On April 2, 1988, the same day Christopher escaped, Robert Berdella was arrested on charges of sexual assault. Investigators entered the home at 4315 Charlotte Street and found the bed Christopher had been abused on, as well as other incriminating evidence, including syringes, prescription drugs, eyedroppers, various ropes, leather belts, an iron pipe, a human skull in the closet, Larry's decomposed head in the yard, the chainsaw with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs on it, a miter saw, plastic blood-stained barrels, hacksawed human vertebrae, sexual devices, pornographic literature, a book on narcotics, newspaper clippings about Jerry's disappearance, James's wallet and driver's license, and an envelope full of human teeth. Further investigations and searches led officials to find 368 photos of at least 20 different men, both dead and alive in copious, disturbing positions. They also discovered the log Robert was keeping, detailing the torture and deaths of each victim, including sufferers of sodomy who he chose not to keep and torment to death. They reached out to the men on the log to decipher who may be dead and who was able to walk away from his house of horrors alive. Robert was well known within the male prostitution community as someone who typically drugged the men before having sex with them, whether they consented or not. Some of the prostitutes also refused to go along with Robert, not just because of his drugging reputation, but because they noticed that some men went missing after being picked up by him. After the discoveries in the home and confirmation from Christopher and Freddie, Robert's 1 count of sexual assault was accompanied by 1 count of felonious restraint, 7 counts of forcible sodomy, and 1 charge of murder by dismemberment. He was held in protective custody in the Jackson County Jail with a bond of $500,000, which would be the equivalent of roughly $1,325,200 in 2024. In August 1988, Robert pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Larry Pearson and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and was transferred to Missouri State Penitentiary. On August 24th, as part of a plea bargain, 6 counts of sodomy and the 1 charge of sexual assault were dropped, and he was sentenced to an additional 7 years for the 1 count of forcible sodomy and 1 count of felonious restraint against Christopher Bryson. On September 13, 1988, he made a plea for the additional 5 murders, stating if he willingly confessed and gave all the graphic details, prosecution would have to promise not to seek the death penalty. During his testimony, he said, "These were not people that I thought of, once I had them bound and was using them. They became something other than people to me. I never thought it out to the level of, what if one of these bodies ever gets loose?" Robert had his formal hearing on December 19, 1988, where he gave a harrowing testimony and was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder for Robert Sheldon and second-degree murder for the other 4 victims, adding 5 concurrent life sentences to his punishment. Unfortunately, the sexual sadist did not get to live out his days in prison, as he began suffering heart problems just 3 years into his life sentence. On October 8, 1992, he started experiencing severe chest pains and was taken via ambulance to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where the 43-year-old was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. It is calamitous that Robert Berdella didn't get to live out his days in prison. He definitely got off easy, unlike his poor victims. Could a movie really entice someone this much to perform such heinous and nightmarish actions? Or was it something that had always been festering inside his black soul that led him to do such revolting things to these men? It is also speculated that there were more victims, but due to their profession of choice, most missing cases went uncared for, and therefore unsolved. Robert died too soon, and took the truth right along with him.